You, I reckon, will be pretty familiar with the concept of a skeleton, but could you, if I asked you, tell me exactly what it does? And if you couldn't, that's because we're not aware of the functions of the skeleton. Yes, I know it's exciting. Let's get into it. I'm going to talk to you about 4 roles, 4 purposes, 4 functions this skeleton has. And the first one I want to introduce you to is movement, okay? Now, the skeleton itself cannot move. It needs assistance. It actually needs to be moved. And that is one of the reasons why muscles attach to the skeleton. So muscle attachment is a feature of the skeleton. So for example, if you can imagine a quadricep muscle just above here, very bulgy, just above here, this femur, that will insert via a tendon actually, which carries the patella in this case, and it inserts down here onto the tibia, and it's there at this point here that muscle attachment occurs. So we've got muscle attachment, and that's to allow muscles which generate force to move the skeleton. We can describe this as a process of anchorage. Okay, the skeleton is an anchor for the muscular force contraction, therefore movement. Long bones such as the femur, the tibia, they act as levers. And of course, we've got joints, and it's at joints, whether we are talking about here, for example, or the elbow or the knee. We have got joints, and joints are where movement actually occurs. Okay, movement occurs at those joints. Let's just come down a little bit and let's go to our second batch of roles. We are talking here about support of the body. Okay, so let's remind ourselves, nothing too difficult, that the skeleton is solid. It is rigid. Now, actually, let me put a little asterisk by rigid. That's not entirely true. The skeleton has what we call, or long bones have got tensile strength. They can bend ever so slightly, but effectively it's solid, it's rigid, it provides support, and it provides the human upright posture, or the upright walking posture. Now consider, for example, how much of technique in sport might change if that upright posture wasn't the case. All of our sporting techniques are based around this notion. Well, that's not quite all. I suppose sports where we're sitting down, for example, would be exceptions. And because of this, that support informs sporting technique. Okay, so think about your favorite activity, your favorite sport. It is clearly informed, or it is structured by the support mechanism, the shape that the skeleton actually provides. Let's look at the third point. We are looking here at protection. Now, this thing is one of the more obvious examples. The skeleton is hard, it's rigid, it protects things like soft tissues. Okay, so soft tissues. Think of some examples of this. It could be that we're talking about the ribs and the sternum protecting the soft tissue of the chest, the thoracic cavity. It could be this opening of the vertebra here that's protecting the spinal cord. It could be this bons, this cranium protecting the brain, which is inside if a horse rider falls off and lands on their head during an equestrian event, or a rugby player is hit hard with a tackle and hits the ground with some force, and so on. The cranium protects. We could even talk about the pelvis that protects the soft tissue and some of the reproductive organs in that part of the abdomen. So these are important points. Now I want you to look at this wording quite closely. The skeleton, in many cases, encloses and protects. And I think the brain surrounded by the cranium is a really great example of that. So let's put in some of our examples. We're talking about the cranium and the brain, therefore, for obvious reasons. We're talking about the ribs. We're talking about, let's say, the spinal cord. Now, I want to throw a little bit of an idea at you here. We're talking about protection in this sense. I think it's quite interesting to reflect on the cranium just briefly, because don't forget that if the head suffers an impact, for example, a punch in boxing, a clash of heads in football, falling over in any sport, then the brain will literally kind of bounce around in the inside of the skull, and it may well hit the inside of what? The cranium, and that can cause concussion. So just be aware, this protection isn't perfect. It comes at a cost, and there are limitations. So it might just be worth reflecting on that. And finally, guys, and I'll do this in a vivid red, we've got the idea of blood cell production. Now, this, unless you've studied this in your biology, might surprise you a little bit. But yeah, we have got things like long bones of the femur. They contain bone marrow, or the tibia here, or the ulna contain bone marrow. And in that bone marrow, within that shaft cavity of long bones, that bone marrow is capable of producing from stem cells white blood cells. That's a B, believe it or not. Red blood cells, which are white blood cells, of course, for the immune system, red blood cells for the transportation of oxygen and CO2. But we also produce in there platelets. Now, just be careful with platelets, because platelets are actual cell fragments, not entire cells. But of course, they travel around in the bloodstream and they cause that clotting action of the blood if a blood vessel becomes broken. And that, again, the platelets themselves start their lives within the skeleton, in the bone marrow, within the shafts of long bones, actually of flat bones too. There we go.